These are your notes for Unit 7, Day 4 of Algebra 1. If you would like to see your warm-up, the review question, or any homework questions we covered in class today, just look at the finished notes. So today we're going to continue on our journey of factoring, and we're going to learn how to factor the difference of two squares and how to factor the sum and difference of two cubes. So these are special types of factoring problems. So the difference of two squares, what does the difference of two squares look like? Well, let's multiply out x plus 8 times x minus 8. We did this in our last unit when we were multiplying polynomials, but let's look at this again. So x plus 8 times x minus 8. You end up with x squared plus 8x minus 8x and minus 64. And so notice what happens to those two middle terms. Positive 8x and negative 8x will cancel with each other. And so you're just left with x squared minus 64. So why do we call this a difference of two squares? Well, x squared is a perfect square. It's x times x, and 64 is a perfect square because it's 8 times 8. And it's a difference because you're subtracting those two perfect squares. So we call it a difference of two squares because you have two perfect squares and you're subtracting them. So when you go to factor them, now remember when we factor x squared plus bx plus c, we need two numbers. When you multiply them, you get c, and when you add them, you get b. But all we have is x squared minus 64. So in this case, we need two numbers that multiply to negative 64, and add to, there's no middle term, so they have to add to 0. So we want two numbers. When you multiply them, you get negative 64, and when you add them, you get 0. That's positive 8 and negative 8. So you get x plus 8 and x minus 8. So when you go to factor a difference of two squares, you need the first term to be a perfect square and the second term to be a perfect square. And you want to be subtracting those two terms. And when you do it, notice x squared is x times x. And then 64, well, negative 64 is 8 times negative 8. It also works when you have ax squared plus bx plus c. So let's multiply 4x minus 3 times 4x plus 3. So when you multiply this out, 4x minus 3 times 4x plus 3, you get 16x squared minus 12x plus 12x and minus 9. And so again, notice those two middle terms, negative 12x and positive 12x, will cancel with each other. So you are just left with 16x squared minus 9. And again, this is a difference of two squares because 16x squared is 4x times 4x, and 9 is 3 times 3. And it's a difference because you're subtracting them. And so, to do a difference of two squares, 16x squared is 4x times 4x, and 9 is 3 times 3. And then you add and subtract to get the negative 9. So it'll be 4x plus 3 times 4x minus 3. And that's how a difference of two squares work. So a difference of two squares is two terms. You're subtracting them, and both of the terms are perfect squares. And when you go to factor it, you have two parentheses. The 16x squared is 4x times 4x, and then the 9 is 3 times 3, and one's plus and one's minus. All right, so if we want to factor y squared minus 44, first you need to make sure that they're both perfect squares. Y squared is y times y. 144 is 12 times 12, and you're subtracting in the middle, so it's a difference. And so when you go to factor this, it's y and y, 12 and 12, and to get to a negative 144, one needs to be positive and one needs to be negative. So we have y plus 12 times y minus 12. X squared minus 1. X squared is a perfect square. It's x times x. 1 is a perfect square because it's 1 times 1. And we're subtracting in the middle, so we have a difference. And so when you go to factor this, it would be x plus 1 times x minus 1. All right, let's look at the next one. 16m squared minus 81. 16 m squared is 4m times 4m. 81 is 9 times 9. So when you go to factor this difference of two squareds, you get 4m plus 9 times 4m minus 9. 38a squared minus 49b squared. 36a squared is 6a times 6a. 49b squared is 7b times 7b. And we're subtracting them, so it's a difference of two perfect squares. So we get 6a plus 7b times 6a minus 7b when you go to factor it. All right, let's look at the next grouping of 4. X squared minus 16 over 25. Are these perfect squares? Well, x squared is x times x. 16 over 25 is 4 over 5 times 4 over 5. Because 4 times 4 is 16, 5 times 5 is 25, and we're subtracting in the middle. So this ends up being x plus 4/5 times x minus 4/5. Y squared minus 100 over 121. Y squared is a perfect square because it's y times y. 100 over 121 is 10 over 11 times 10 over 11. And we're subtracting, so it'll be y plus 10 over 11 times y minus 10 over 11 when you go to factor it. X to the 8th minus y to the 10th. X to the 8th is x to the 4th times x to the 4th, so it's a perfect square. And y to the 10th is y to the 5th times y to the 5th, so it's a perfect square as well. So this becomes x to the 4th minus y to the 5th, and x to the 4th plus y to the 5th. It doesn't matter which goes first, the plus or the minus, because you're multiplying, so either way will work. A to the 4th minus 16. Well, a to the 4th is a squared times a squared. 16 is 4 times 4, and we're subtracting in the middle, so we're good. So this becomes a squared plus 4 times a squared minus 4. On this one, we need to be careful because notice what happens in that second parentheses. You have a difference of two squares again, 2 times 2 and a times a. So this factors again. So you have a squared plus 4, and then this a squared minus 4 will factor into a plus 2 times a minus 2. So that is the original expression factored completely. All right, let's look at the next page. Factor. Remember, the first step on any factoring problem is you want to look for a common factor first. So if there is a greatest common factor, you need to undistribute or factor that out first. So in number 1, 36y to the 3rd minus 25y. They both have a y in common, so I'm going to factor out the y. And then I'm left with 36y squared minus 25. Now that becomes a difference of two squareds because you have 5 times 5 and 6y times 6y, and you're subtracting in the middle. So this is going to be y, and then 6y plus 5 and 6y minus 5. And that would be that expression factored completely. All right, negative 9m squared plus 100. Well, 9m squared is 3m times 3m, and 100 is 10 times 10. But notice this time there's a plus sign in the middle. But could I rewrite it so it has a minus sign in the middle? Well, it would be positive 100 and then minus 9m squared. So if I rewrote it, I could have a minus sign in the middle. So now I have a difference of two squareds. So it would be 10 plus 3m times 10 minus 3m. And that would be that expression factored completely. All right, so I'm just going to introduce the idea of the sum and difference of two cubes. So it's going to be either you're taking two perfect cubes and adding them, or two perfect cubes and subtracting them, and we'll see what happens when you go to factor it. So let's multiply this out. So we have x plus 2 times x squared minus 2x plus 4. So let's see what happens when I multiply this out. So I get x cubed plus 2x squared minus 2x squared minus 4x plus 4x and plus 8. Well, notice what happens to those middle terms. Negative 2x squared and positive 2x squared cancel, and the positive 4x and the negative 4x cancel. So all I'm left with is x cubed plus 8. So that is going to be a sum of 2 cubes because 8 is 2 times 2 times 2, so that's a perfect cube. And x cubed is x times x times x, so it's a perfect cube. And it's a sum because we're adding in the middle. So what does it look like when you factor it? Well, let's look at the original expression. X cubed plus 8 would be x times x times x plus 2 times 2 times 2. Notice what the first parentheses is. It's the cube root of x cubed plus the cubed root of 8. So it's what those perfect cubes are when you take their cube root. And then times, how does it work? Well, then that next parentheses, you have x squared and you have 2 squared. So to get to that next parentheses, you square the first term. And to get to the last term, you square the last term. So x squared is x squared. 2 squared is 4. So that'll be the first term and the last term. And now to get to that middle term, negative 2x, what you do is you multiply those two terms, and then it's the opposite sign. So it'll be minus 2x, and then that's plus 4. So in the sum of 2 cubes, you have 2 parentheses. You have a short parentheses and a long parentheses, and then the signs are plus, minus, plus. All right, let's look at the difference of 2 cubes. So let's multiply this one out. So we have x minus 3, and then we have x squared plus 3x plus 9. So if I go to multiply this out, I get x cubed minus 3x squared plus 3x squared minus 9x plus 9x and minus 27. And again, notice the middle terms, positive 3x and negative 3x squared cancel. Positive 9x and negative 9x cancel. So I am just left with x cubed minus 27. X cubed is x times x times x. 27 is 3 times 3 times 3. And it's a difference of 2 cubes because we're subtracting in the middle. So how is this going to work? Well, that first parentheses is going to be similar to the first parentheses in the sum of 2 cubes. So the cube root of x cubed is x. The cube root of 27 is 3. And since it's a difference of 2 cubes, that first parentheses is going to have a minus sign. And then it's the same thing. We're going to square that first guy, x, to get the first term in the second parentheses. And then we're going to square 3 to get the third term in the next parentheses. So this will be x squared, and this will be 9. And then again, you multiply those two terms, but without the sign. So we're going to multiply. And so 3 times x is 3x. And then your signs are minus, then plus, then plus. So for the difference of 2 cubes, you have a short parentheses and a long parentheses, and the signs are minus, plus, plus. All right. So here are the formulas for the sums and differences of 2 cubes. If you are adding 2 perfect cubes, so a cubed plus b cubed. A cubed is a times a times a. B cubed is b times b times b. The first parentheses will be a plus b. So you take the cube root and take the cube root, and it's positive in the middle. And then remember, to get to the second parentheses, you square the first term. To get to the third term, you square that second term. And then the middle term, you multiply a times b, so you multiply those, and then it's minus in the middle. So the signs are plus, minus, plus for the sum of 2 cubes. For the difference of 2 cubes, you have 2 perfect cubes that you're subtracting, so a times a times a, then minus b times b times b. That first parentheses is the cube root and the cube root. You subtract in the middle. And then the same thing, you square that first term, you square that second term, and then you multiply those 2 terms without the sign to get that middle term. And then for the difference of 2 cubes, your signs are minus, then plus, then plus. All right, so let's factor some. Y cubed plus 64. First, let's make sure it is a sum of 2 perfect cubes. y cubed is y times y times y. 64 is 4 times 4 times 4. So when I go to factor this, we have a short parentheses and a long parentheses. The first parentheses is y, and then plus 4. And then remember square, so we get y squared. Square 4, and we get 16. And then multiply them. 4 times y is 4y. And then since it's a sum of two cubes, your signs go plus, minus, plus. So it'll be plus, minus, plus. So it'll be y plus 4 in the first parentheses, then y squared minus 4y plus 16 in the second parentheses. The next one looks to be like a difference of two perfect cubes. P cubed is p times p times p. 125 is 5 times 5 times 5. So when I factor it, I have a short parentheses, then a longer one. The first parentheses is going to be p minus 5, since it's a difference of two perfect cubes. And then square it, so p squared, and square 5, and you get 25. Then multiply them, and you get 5p. And then since it's a difference of two perfect cubes, it's minus plus plus is the sign. So minus plus plus. So we would get p minus 5 in the first parentheses, then p squared plus 5p plus 25 in the second parentheses. All right, let's factor 8y to the third plus 1. So to make sure it's a perfect cube and a perfect cube first. 8y cubed is 2y times 2y times 2y. And 1 is 1 times 1 times 1. It's a sum of two perfect cubes. So the first parentheses will be 2y plus 1. And then the second parentheses, square it. 2y squared would be 2y times 2y, which is 4y squared. 1 squared is 1. Then multiply them. 2y times 1 is 2y. And then since it's a sum, the sign should go plus, minus, plus. So it'll be plus, minus, plus. So you get 2y plus 1 in the first parentheses, and then 4y squared minus 2y plus 1 in the second parentheses. All right, so now we have 32x to the third minus 500y to the third. Remember, in any factor problem, the first step is to see if they have a common factor. 532 are both divisible by 4. So let's pull out that 4, and then we would have 8x to the third, then minus 500 divided by 4 would be 25 times 5, so it would be 125. But let's just make sure. So it would be 500 divided by 4, and you get 125. So this would be 125y to the third. Now notice on the inside, now I have a difference of two perfect cubes. 8x to the third is 2x times 2x times 2x. 25y to the third is 5y times 5y times 5y. So when I go to factor this, this is a difference of two cubes. So I'll have 2x minus 5y in the first parentheses. And then in my second parentheses, square 2x. 2x times 2x is 4x squared. 5y times 5y is 25y squared. And then multiply them. 2x times 5y is 10xy. And then your sign should go minus plus plus, so minus plus plus. And that would be that expression factored completely. All right, your homework is 7.5, and then some review problems from first